Good. Today, I'd like to talk about inclusive classrooms. Inclusive classrooms are kind of a hot button topic when it comes to special education. But before we get into that, what are inclusive classrooms? Essentially, what they are is whenever you take a student who has disabilities, that's been diagnosed with some sort of disabilities on an IEP, a 504, what have you, and they are inclusive in the classroom, the general classroom with their peers that are their own age. This is what is considered the least restrictive environment, is whenever they're in the class with their own age group. A least restrictive environment refers to the mandate in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that students with disabilities should be educated to the maximum extent appropriate with their peers who do not have disabilities. That is according to Yale. And they go on to talk about how sometimes that's not feasible. Sometimes a child may not be able to function in the general classroom. Maybe there's too much stimulus, maybe there's some other issue going on, maybe they're multi-handicapped and there's some issues under that are going on there that's preventing them from being able to function properly in the general classroom. But by and large, students with disabilities are supposed to be included in the everyday classroom. So why is this a struggle? This seems like a no-brainer. This seems like, yeah, everyone wants them to be included. That's not really the case. Yes, on one respect, people want students with disabilities to be in the classroom because they know they need their peers and things of that nature, the socialization. But bottom line, in reality, it's hard. It's hard to do this, do it effectively, and to where it doesn't hinder the other students in the room as well. And so the teacher's perspective isn't really coming from a place of of hatred, but many teachers take some issue with inclusion because of desperation. They don't have enough help. They don't have enough um, education behind them on these specific problems, symptoms of the disabilities that they're seeing. Because ultimately, if you have a child in your classroom that has been diagnosed with autism, and then you've got a child that's been diagnosed with ADHD, and then you've got a child that's been diagnosed with some kind of emotional distress, they're all in the same classroom with your 20, 25 other students. As a teacher, that's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to manage that classroom, to properly make it work, and also individualize their educational progress by modifying all of your work that you're doing for everybody else to match those kids' needs. There's a lot to it that makes it very hard on the teacher to do properly. But also, before we move on, teachers on average do not get a lot of education in special education. They are not taught how to handle children who have been diagnosed with some sort of autism, ADHD, whatever it is. And so, for instance, at NSU, I've learned that if you're a general ed, you only have to take one class on special education. That's simply not enough. And so that is the teacher perspective, not hatred, just I don't know if we can do this and do this right. The other side of it is parents are, you got to figure it out because ultimately where they're coming from is where most parents can put themselves is they want their kids socializing with other children their own age. Their kids deserve a proper education and don't deserve to be shunned. And ultimately, they know if that their kids are not included in the classroom, then it's very likely that their kids will fall through the cracks. If all their kids are over here, and then the rest of the kids are over here, the focus is going to be on the kids without disabilities, and they're going to fall through the cracks. And that's the parents' worst fear. That's where they're coming from. Inclusive classrooms have a long history. Brown versus Board of Education, something that we know from learning in our high schools and things of that nature, and then just a major landmark in our society is Brown versus Board of Education, which basically stated that African American students and white students should be in the same school. Segregation should not exist in schools. All students should have equal educational opportunities, is the way that it states it. And that wording right there was used to make great strides for the disabled community. In fact, the fight became a consistent fight for inclusive classrooms. In 1974, Congress realized that 1.75 million students with disabilities did not receive any educational services. They were in school, they did not have any help with education whatsoever. 1.75 million students. And so in 1975, you have the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. This was born in 1975 and was later, it was adapted, it was revised into what we now know as the Individuals with Disabilities of Education Act, IDEA. Originally in 1975, this mainly just gave money to schools to provide education for those with disabilities. However, it was revised pretty heavily through IDEA in 1997, to where they came up with the idea of a least restrictive environment, saying we need an inclusive classroom. As much as they can be with their peers, they need to be with their peers. In the story. And that was the whole concept behind IDEA. There's been a lot of studies on inclusive classrooms. One that really struck my interest was one that looked at the quality of inclusive classroom. And so they looked at 51 early childhood classrooms with an average of about 3 IEPs, and they monitored how the kids learned, their growth, and they looked at these different classrooms with a wide range of IEPs and thought, okay, is it effective? Is it not? Having them in the room with their peers. And pretty much across the board, they found out that it was effective, that you did have measurable growth with the children with disabilities, and that it helps them improve their learning. So parents can look at studies like this and say, my kid needs to be in an inclusive classroom because it is that vital to their future. It's obviously helpful. It's obviously something that they need. But the teachers are still saying, but I don't know how to do it. I have no way to do this and do it properly. And that becomes the issue. Swain did a study in 2004 looking at different pieces of literature and different classrooms and other people's studies. And her work and her conclusions were peer reviewed because she came up with a solution to how to manage an inclusive classroom. And she boiled it down to one simple thing: listening. Listening strategies. And she said, if you're going to be an effective teacher in an inclusive classroom, you've got to teach listening strategies to all your students, whether they're disabled or they don't have a disability, whichever the case is. All your students need to be under the same boat with listening strategies. And when that is implemented, it's going to help you be a more effective teacher in an inclusive classroom. And she went through a list of things to do. And she said, first, you've got to explicitly teach strategies. Say, we're going to learn about listening strategies. You need that in life. And then tell them what that strategy is. Post the strategies in the classroom, reinforce strategies through practice, review strategies. Tell the parents what you're doing and why you're doing it. Be transparent. We're talking about listening strategies, and I think it's going to be a great thing for them and in life just to know how to do that. Then if you are the special education teacher, include it in the IEP that they need listening strategies. Try and even put specific listening strategies to work with that child. Whenever we do that, and we have those listening strategies in place, it makes classroom management much easier, which then makes things work more smoothly. So when we follow that, parents are happy, teachers are happy. But inclusive classrooms in three simple statements is it's been a long, hard fight. It's not perfect, but there's still work to do. It is extremely vital for children who have disabilities to be in an inclusive classroom. But we as teachers have got to make that experience the most effective one, both for the children with disabilities and the children who do not have disabilities. These are my references to the different articles in the book that I shared with you all. I hope this was informative. It sure was informative for me looking into it. I appreciate your time.